Rightio. Okay, so we're on lesson number 3 of our musical instruments and music series. So we've started off this course with a series of drawing. So we looked at brass instruments and how to draw the the shadows and the highlights to make the metal look shiny. And then after that, we looked at some different artists. So we've looked at Paul Klee, an artist, and Susanne Clarke, who both use kind of overlapping imagery. But the particular picture we looked at, which I think I've still got on the screen here, uses rhythmic repeated shapes and things to suggest music. And then we looked at adding watercolours and perhaps a little bit of colour pencil into that drawing as well. So we're going to carry on with that today. But as you will have seen from the email, I've got some extra bits the next bits for you to try out. And that involves actually using more than one instrument within the picture. And we're going to do a pencil drawing of that first of all, and then hopefully move on a little bit later to painting it with acrylics and things. So looking at techniques for that as well. So we'll have a look at what I've got to show you. I've got a couple of bits to show you and a bit of art history as well, hopefully. So we'll go over to the studio wall where we can have a look. So here we go. So this in the middle here is a Susanne Clarke painting. And you'll see how a lot of there's a couple of instruments on here. So you've got this kind of, I think it's a cello in the background and the top of a cello in the foreground. And then in the very background, you can see things such as, looks like a keyboard there and a few other small details. Some of the imagery has been broken and fragmented as well. And when I looked at this, it reminded me very much of some of Picasso's work as well. So I've got a Picasso picture that I'm going to show you in a minute. But this one, this is the one that I worked on last week. Now, you remember me saying that Susanne Clarke, she actually uses acrylic paint. I took it at first to be watercolours, and so I just thought, we'll try watercolours with it. So if I just bring that up to the top there, we can have a closer look at it. I've got it on my desk as well, so I'll show you in a few minutes. So I was using, I had the yellow, the pencil drawing, I actually painted into after I'd drawn it, and then worked back into it to make to keep the shininess of it, but also to bring it out of the colour background a little bit. And then I've used constant, and you'll remember me doing this, layers and layers of watercolour to create a really rich colour palette in the background. I did say that perhaps I could have used less colours in the background and to keep it a bit more simple. And help the trumpet to stand out a little bit. But sometimes it's just nice to explore and play around with colour, which was kind of the aim of what we were doing last lesson. So once I'd put in the watercolour into the shapes there, I then started to add a little bit of colour pencil in as well. And you can see here, it's one instrument, but in the background, I'm trying to create this sense of movement and music and atmosphere by repeating that trumpet a few times, but just the silhouette, and occasionally leaving out some of the details, perhaps that I didn't want to be too distracting, basically. So you can see at the bottom here, we've got the outlines that I'd drawn in. I didn't quite get as far with that one. But it's there so you can understand the technique a little bit. The other thing I did before I applied watercolour onto the trumpet was I used a little bit of wax crayon. So the wax crayon preserves the white of the paper, and then when I put the watercolour over the top, it resists, so that you get the white. The white stands out, and the yellow is obviously painted in the areas that I wanted it. So it was a lot of fun playing around with that one. Now, the next thing we want to do is we're going to do multiple instruments. So I'll talk about that in a second, but I think I was going to show you I was just going to remind you of the Poole Klee or Poole Clay as well. So I'll just put Susanne Clarke down here. So the idea for the trumpet came from looking at Susanne Clarke and also Poole Clay. So let's just unlock it and then I can move it. So Poole Clay's shapes are repeated to, again, create a sense of movement and energy and this kind of rhythm idea that we had with Clarke's work, and gave me the idea to do the repeated trumpets and things as well. I'll just put that one out of the way down there and lock it all up so it doesn't move again. And so here's the Picasso. So you can see again some of the similarities between Picasso's work and some of the stuff we've been looking at. And indeed, Picasso was one of the artists, including George Braque, who actually discovered or developed this style of artwork as well. So it was called analytical cubism, and it was a phase in the development of his work, and it really revolutionized the representation of musical instruments or musical objects, if you like, and all sorts of things within art. So it was an exploration of form. So he's basically fragmenting and reassembling musical instruments such as guitars, violins, pianos, and other things. And the idea was that within one flat 2D image, you could depict these objects by looking at them from multiple viewpoints. So you can see the side of the top of the cello here, I think it is, and then different elements of it are appearing within the composition as well. And then he's used mostly monochromatic palettes because that allowed him to remain to keep the focus on the form and the structure rather than specifically on the colour of the image as well. And you'll see this one's quite colourful really compared, but a lot of the other ones are very limited in their colours, and it allows you to look at that form. The interesting thing that he did, which we can try a little bit later on as well, is he's added textures to add depth and complexity and to enhance the tactile quality of the instruments. So I don't know if we can see it on here. I think he's obviously used the paint in quite a textural sort of dry brushing way. But if we look really closely down here, you can see that there's these wavy lines and things. I suspect that's him combing into the paint, creating those lines with some sort of instrument, like a comb or something. But a lot of his paintings actually have these really textured areas and sometimes collaged newspapers and other bits and pieces like that he had around him at the time. So really lovely to see some of that as well. And the influence of music was quite important to Picasso as well. He referred to his music often as visual music. And I didn't know that, but I read it recently. And so that's one of the things that you can take from that as well. And he did do a lot of, he did obviously some really famous paintings of these quite primitive looking characters, what you might call primitive looking characters, dancing with musical instruments as well. So it was very innovative at the time. I don't know when this piece was painted, but it would have been the early 20th century, sort of 1903, somewhere around there when he was experimenting with these ideas. But it was very avant-garde at the time. And it reflected a lot of the changes and things that were happening in culture, the change to modern life, really, the development of machineries and things like that. And there are some artists that followed Picasso using this fragmented style called the Futurists, and they were really inspired by machinery and things like that, and speed and mechanics and things like that. So you can see how this artwork, this style of artwork, has been so influential over the last century and even now with the work of Susanne Clarke. So really interesting to have a look at that. And there's something else I want to show you, because I found these when I was doing searching on the internet. So let me see. Here it is, sculpture. So have a look at this. This is a sculpture, and it's not by Picasso, but it's obviously, I don't know who made it actually. I should have looked it up, but isn't that interesting? Different musical instruments that have been old ones that have been cut and arranged to make something very much like a Picasso picture, or even Susan Clarke. So with Susan Clarke, you saw how she broke those shapes down. This is what's going on with the sculpture and Picasso's work. And Klee's work is more about the actual how to represent sound, I suspect, in this case. So some fantastic stuff to look at. But what we're going to do today is we're going to be putting different musical instruments together to create a composition inspired by Susanne Clarke. So we'll go over to the old desk and have a look. Hello. Right. So here is one of the drawings I did in the first week. And you'll remember that we did a pencil drawing, and the challenge was to see if the watercolour would be okay on a pencil drawing. And it did work really well. And again, what I did on some of these white areas to preserve those white areas is use the wax crayon, or you can use a wax crayon, or I used a candle wax because it's transparent, shows the paper, and then you wash over the top and you have this wax resist effect. So that was a lot of fun. I did that one in freehand, but I asked everybody, you could do it in freehand if you wanted to, or you could use a grid. So let's just move some more of those sculptures out of the way. So here is the one that I was doing the other week. And this was a drawing I did where I drew a grid of squares so I could concentrate on all this complicated stuff one little bit at a time, then the watercolour and so forth. And this was the tracing paper that we used. And I just kind of repeated this in the background. This is quite a large piece, which is probably why I didn't really get as far as finishing it in that week. But once you've got those shapes, then you can start applying the colours in the background as well. And I've used a bit of wax crayon in there, as I mentioned earlier. So the next stage, when you get to it, if you haven't got that far yet and you've still got other stuff to finish, please do. Because I've been really impressed actually by the way that everyone's work has been developing. So you keep going with it, basically. And then you can get onto this as soon as you're ready. So this is 3 instruments, 3 photographs that I've drawn over the top, overlapping each other. I haven't got those photographs with me now because I think other people have used them. But you can take 3 different images like this. You can draw it freehand like I've done here. So I started with this nice cello shape here. And then the next thing I did is draw this shape over here. And the tricky bit is being able to focus on the shapes of the actual thing you're drawing at the time without getting too distracted by the others. So it can get a little bit confusing, but you can do it. So I've done that here. And then afterwards I've shaded it, obviously, but I've darkened some areas like the background here really heavily to bring different elements of the picture out. And then I've also let some of the lines continue through the drawing of the cello here as well, and a little bit here on this funnel from, I think it's a part of a French horn. And then I've used lines that follow the shapes to maybe suggest a little bit of movement as well. But this is, of course, very much inspired by this sort of thing, just here. Quite nice getting in close. Look, you can see the paint and brush strokes on there. So we're going to do something like that. All right. Now, if you're thinking, okay, I want to do this, don't necessarily want to have to worry about the shapes, I just want to think about the composition of the picture, then this is what you can do. So I've got a couple of images that I've traced out already just to get the shape. Nothing more, because I know I can draw the shape, but I'd also really like to focus on the composition. So I'm not going to go mad on this. I'm just going to get the overall kind of shape of it without spending too long on it, so that I can show you what I mean. So just draw the shapes of your instruments. So you've got somewhere to start with. Just do it really quick. So, and of course you'll know how to trace, but remember that if you want it this way around, then you'll need to go over the back first and then turn back again, and then it'll transfer. So for this, I'm just gonna go over the back like that. So this, what I just traced that with is a 6B pencil. So it's a really soft pencil, which means that a lot of graphite will go onto my tracing paper. So I could switch to a harder pencil to do the transferring, and it will come out a little bit clearer, what it should do. So if I can go around it like this. I'll just do the outline. And, if you've got the basic sort of shape of the whole thing, then you can go into the details a little bit more later and neaten it up and things like that. Shade it nicely. So there's, hopefully that'll come through. Yeah, there it is. Look, so I've got one on there. And then, of course, you can sketch it in a little bit better. I might draw another freehand one. But later, the aim of this is that we are going to paint it, which I'm hoping I'll start as well this evening. So now I've done that, I can say, right, okay, so I would like maybe another instrument to sort of just overlap it here. And this is where you can start making decisions about the composition and the arrangement of everything. So if I just go around this trumpet, got another trumpet like this. Again, I'm not going to draw everything in, but I'm just going to go around it. So this harder lead will push tracing or the graphite onto the paper, hopefully a little bit easier, a bit more clearly, I should say. So there's my shape of my trumpet, not everything. So one thing you could do, which Susanne Clarke has done, is she's used close-ups of instruments as well. The limiting factor with using tracing like this is that you can't decide to enlarge it as such if you're going to do the tracing, because tracing will stay the same shape. But if you do it freehand, of course, you could say, right, I want the trumpet bigger than that, actually, so I'm going to sketch it bigger onto the drawing. So, and this is what we were doing earlier on today, was creating these compositions. And it's a brilliant exercise in making decisions about where you'd like things to go within a picture. So, and then look, I could have a close-up sort of around there. And when you've got this, it's kind of hovering in the middle of my sheet of paper. So you then can decide how you might crop your design. Oh, I'm doing it the wrong way around. There you go. First classic mistake made. So you can use some paper to work out where and how you might crop your image. And I'll show you that as soon as I've got around this shape. Like that. So something like that anyway. So there's my sort of composition, very roughly drawn out. Put that one down there as well. So there's my design, if you like. Now, from there, you might think, well, how could I make this design work a bit better? Because it's right in the mid, there's all this space around it, and there's a temptation to fill empty space. Sometimes it's good to have empty spaces, but sometimes it's nice to perhaps get some paper, some better paper than this really, but that's not white, which is why I'm folding it. But I could take it and crop it in like this, perhaps, and then because you can see how Susanne Clarke works, it's very intimate, it's very close up, isn't it? So they're quite crowded pictures in a sense, really, but it's the colour and the tone that makes a difference to the arrangement of everything in the end. So you can take your paper, if you like this, and work out where the borders or the boundaries are going to be. Sometimes some of these elements may be chopped off. So you might come in like that, for example. Yeah. And I could do it on this one, on this side as well, look. So I could say, right, well, I like this bit, but I'm not so keen on that bit. Just take that out. There you go. So I might say, oh gosh, actually, I'm not so keen on that side, so I'm going to crop it sort of like that, maybe. Well, that might not look very good now, but the idea is that you can be selective about how and what bits that you end up working with as a composition later or a painting. Okay? Yeah. So the next stage then is to draw a few instruments that underlap each other, inspired by Susanne Clarke and Picasso as well. And then what I suggest you do, this is almost like what we did in the last course, where we thought about the balance of light and shadow. By doing a light and shadow drawing like this with light and dark areas, you can then start to plan how you're going to paint. So in here, I could use really nice dark blues, for example. And then I could use oranges. So I could take some inspiration from Susanne Clarke, but it gives you a sense of light and shadow, and it will help you select the colours or the tone of the colours that you're going to use later. All right, there we go.
Thank you.
All right, so does anyone want to ask any questions or need some help at the moment?
Okay, so basically what I do for the rest of this lesson is I create a second design based on some of the instruments that you saw me talking about a few minutes ago. So I just wanted to make sure that my process, or the process I use to create one of these designs, is recorded so that you can have a look and see how I do it. I chose not to use the tracing paper purely because I really enjoy just drawing those shapes out, but please use the tracing paper if you find it easier to make decisions, by moving the tracing paper about before you commit to actually applying the shape of the guitar or the shape of the musical instrument onto the piece of paper. So with this drawing here that I'm doing of this wonderfully shaped guitar, is I've used my pencil to measure the proportions of the main part of the guitar and the top part. And then with those measurements, you see those lines going across. With those measurements, I was able to get a reasonably accurate shape for the drawing of the guitar. So I just went for a straight down the middle sort of shape to begin with, unlike the last one where I didn't quite do that. And here I've just started to obviously sketch out the top of this cello shape we've got here. I don't know what that's called, but this is where the difficult bit is, I suppose, for some, if you've not done it before, is being able to see past the last drawing in order to create the one that goes over the top and overlaps with the guitar in this case. And it looks quite complex and things. That was an instrument that I thought was quite interesting. It looks quite sort of complex, but once you start shading it, you can be very selective in your composition by literally shading areas in order to make certain areas that are interesting to you stand out. So in other words, you're creating the composition by doing the tone, and of course by overlapping all of these instruments. So I've restricted it today to two to three instruments. If you use 4, I think it could get a little bit complicated, especially if you're overlapping as much as this. But already look, with a little bit of shading, we can start to see some parts of the image pop out, which is a lot of fun. This is the fun bit, I think, really. Making the decisions, enjoying those decisions, and creating your composition. So I took a little bit longer than the last one on this, so I had the full 2-hour lessons to do it. I just kept going, really, and I did find myself quite well in the flow whilst drawing this, and by that I mean really good concentration and sort of being pretty absorbed in the subject, which was wonderful fun, actually. So you can see some lines I've, some edges and lines I've exaggerated and brought out much more clearly and heavily, so that those bits can pop out of the image a little bit more. So you can use line and different thicknesses and dark or lightnesses to help the image sort of emerge out of the mass of lines that we've got here. So this is a great sort of exercise as well for exploring composition and arrangement of different things. And it is a lot of freedom in it as well, because you don't have to restrict yourself in the things that you put in and where you place things. So in that respect, there's a lot of freedom. But as I mentioned earlier, restricting it to say 2-3 instruments is probably a good idea, because that gives you some sort of parameter to work within. Now the other thing is that you can also crop the image by placing sheets of paper over the top, and I think I talked about that a little bit earlier. So with this image, of course, we would more than likely crop it so that then it changes the way the spaces around the object feel and kind of holds it within a kind of format, a little bit like Sarah Clarke's work just up there. So next time I'm going to have a go at painting this one, I think. So I'll be taking the outlines of this composition, doing an underpainting, and then working over the top with acrylic paints. I may introduce some texture, a little bit like some of the work that Picasso did with paper collage and different things like that being inserted over the top or placed over the top of the imagery to create this texture that we were mentioning earlier. So we'll see what goes on in lesson 4 for that. Later on in these lessons, we're hoping to also take a look at musicians playing instruments as well. So we should have a lot of fun. So you can see it's starting to emerge a little bit more. I've put the reflections in on the brass instrument, which I think's a French horn, a bit like the one I drew before. We've got the, you can see the frets, if you call them frets, on the cello head coming through the guitar as well. And the buttons, or the, I don't know what you call all these different parts, but the buttons on the French horn also on the guitar. So all these different elements are appearing together. Obviously this is where I've paused just to have a chat with a student about some work. So the whole of the composition taking shape really nicely. I started off with a lot of the darker tones in this image, but you can see there are some midtones appearing in various areas of the picture as well, and some highlights have also been left to create that contrast. The top of the guitar, where the keys are, I've left unshaded. It was mostly black, but I decided to leave that so that it kind of pops out a little bit more. So don't feel like you can't, as I say, break the rules, but just be a bit more selective about what you do and don't shade in order to make the picture work. So this is obviously a sketch. It's a drawing of those instruments placed together. So if you're going to do a serious painting, of course, you might work into this somewhat more and add some more highlights, remove some areas. You know, the guitar, for example, might add some highlights around the S-shaped holes there. But basically it's about exploring, subtracting, removing, adding areas of tone and shadow to the picture. So I hope you've enjoyed today, and next week I'm hoping that we can use these to do some painting. So I'll see you next time. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye bye.